Together we know. Read on through every page, from 1906 to 26, every stage. Robot lady's voice so clear and bold, analysis silver, wisdom gold. Through the letters, through the diary, learning who he was, who he would be. Trenches in the darkness, wounded in the war, vow made in Bristol he could not ignore. Mrs. Moore is waiting, Patty's gone away. Spirits held in bondage, words he had to say. Philosophy at Oxford, an atheist writes home. Dimmer dreaming, never quite all alone. Deep across the digital sea, chronicles unfold for you and me. Read on through every page, from 1906 to 26, every stage. Robot lady's voice so clear and bold, analysis silver, wisdom gold. Through the letters, through the diary, learning who he was, who he would be. Warnie and his father, and Lily at the door. Walter Hooper's pages always wanting more. Blair is on his quest, Milton in his head. Every word he ever wrote, everything he said. From the start until the end, magic tales
Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I'm having some strange audio feedback, so I'm not really sure what's going on here.
I'm going to hear that feedback a little bit too. If you want, I can try muting on my side, or maybe you can double check your mic or the setup. Let me know what you'd like to do and we'll get it sorted out.
All right, hang on, robot lady. Let me see. I think I can fix this pretty easily. Yeah, I just need to turn that off right there. And then I think I'm good. It looks like everybody can still hear us. All right, let's start this over. I'm Jeff. This is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him together through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. In this episode, the year is 1932 in C.S. Lewis's life. He's 33 years old. He's a fellow at Magdalen College. He is a tutor in English language and literature. He is a published author with 2 works of poetry, and he's just recently, quote, passed on from believing in God to definitely believing in Christ in Christianity, end quote. This is what he wrote to his lifelong friend Arthur Greeves in a letter dated October 1st, 1931. Back in late 1930, Lewis had begun attending morning chapel services on a daily basis, and in late 1931, Lewis began taking Holy Communion at Holy Trinity Church, Headington Quarry. Also in late 1930, Lewis, his brother Warnie, and Mrs. Moore had all pooled their funds and purchased a house called the Kilns in Headington Quarry, Oxford. This is the home that C.S. Lewis would live in for the rest of his life. He has transferred or transitioned, converted, that's the word I'm looking for, into a Christian, where he was living essentially as an atheist or a soft agnostic, more of a hard atheist for most of his life, his teenage years, and running all the way through his 20s, while he was either a student at Oxford or on staff there as a faculty member. Robot Lady, that's where we are in our project. Our plan is to continue to read through all of his letters, everything that we can get our hands on that he wrote, including his published works, some of them very well known, like the Chronicles of Narnia and the Screwtape Letters to a lesser extent, and then other things that are a little more obscure or unknown. Less known to the wide world is a trilogy that he wrote before the Chronicles of Narnia called the Cosmic Trilogy, or the Science Fiction Trilogy. Some people refer to it as the Space Trilogy. Call it whatever you want. Those 3 books came out before the Chronicles of Narnia. He's also written some theological works, things like The Problem of Pain. He also has a fiction novella, I guess you would call it, not really sure, a fiction story that he wrote exploring the afterlife and what it might be like in heaven and hell, called The Great Divorce. So that's where we find ourselves in the project right now, and we're gonna kick off today's episode by just diving into another letter. The next one is a letter written to his friend Arthur Greeves, dated 1932. So good morning, Robot Lady. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we get started?
That was a fantastic recap, Jeff. I think he set the stage really well. I don't have anything to add right now, but I'm here ready to jump in if you need a bit of context or just a side comment during the reading. So whenever you're set, go for it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Robot Lady. As you can see here, we are working out of the collected letters of C.S. Lewis. This is volume 2 of a 3-volume set. We completed the first volume over the last year and a half, along with a diary that Lewis kept from 1922 to 1927 called All My Road Before Me. So I highly recommend that you get yourself a copy of the books that we're working out of to follow along if you're interested in that sort of thing. So we will kick off right here. I'm actually on the wrong page. Let me flip back. There we go. This is a letter written to his friend Arthur Greeves. That's where we're going to start right here. Published, not published, have been laid up with flu for over a fortnight. Or I should have, if it weren't for this, I should have answered you before, as you preferred. As you preferred my last letter to my previous ones, and also took longer to answer it than ever, I suppose if I want speedy answers to this, I had better write a letter that you don't like. Let me see. I must first select all the subjects which are least likely to interest you, and then consider how to treat them in the most unattractive manner. So Robot Lady here, Lewis, it looks like, is meditating on ways that he can get his friend Arthur to write back to him more promptly. And here he is obviously joking and saying, well, it seems I'm seeing to correlate the fact that if I write about things I know do not interest you, you seem to respond back more quickly than the ones that have topics in them that you've told me you prefer. So he's having a little fun with his friend here. What do you think, Robot Lady?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. It really does have that playful, ironic touch, and it's such a great window into their friendship. And it's interesting too because Lewis often uses his letters to kind of experiment with tone or even test out how his friendships are working. So, yeah, it's a fun little glimpse of his wit.
He goes on in this vein to say, I have half a mind to do it, but on second thoughts, it would be almost as big a bore for me to write it as for you to read it. How exasperating to think of you being at Ballycastle with an unappreciative companion in bad weather and a lethargic mood. It seems such a waste. I thought we talked about Naomi Mitchison before. I've only read one, Black Sparta, and I certainly agree that it holds one. Indeed, I don't know any historical fiction that is so astonishingly vivid and on the whole so true. Here, this is a book called Black Sparta, published 1928 by author Naomi Mitchison. Robot Lady, can you look that up and tell us what that book is about?
Black Sparta by Naomi Mitchison, published in 1928, is a collection of short stories set in ancient Sparta between about 500 and 370 BC. The stories vividly portray a range of voices: aristocrats, slaves, women, and soldiers, highlighting Spartan militarism, political upheaval, and gender dynamics, all through a richly descriptive mythic lens.
All right, good to know. Thanks, Robot Lady. He goes on to say, I also thought it astonishing how, despite the grimness, she got such an air of beauty, almost dazzling beauty, into it. As to the cruelties, I think her obvious relish is morally wicked, but hardly an artistic fault, for she could hardly get some of her effects without it. But it is, in Black Sparta, a historical falsehood, not that the things she describes did not probably happen in Greece, but that they were not typical, the Greeks being no doubt cruel by modern standards, but by the standards of that age extremely humane. She gives you the impression that the cruelty was essentially Greek, whereas it was precisely the opposite. That is, she is unfair, as I should be unfair if I wrote a book about some man whose chief characteristic was that he was the tallest of all the pygmies, and kept on reminding the reader that he was very short. I should be telling the truth, of course, he would be short by our standards, but missing the real point about the man, viz. That he was, by the standard of his own race, a giant. Still, she is a wonderful writer, and I fully intend to read more of her when I have a chance. So some interesting reflection there on this author, Naomi Mitchison. Mitchison, Robot Lady. Can you summarize what his point was that he was making there about how she was handling the cruelty in Greece?
Absolutely. So Lewis is basically saying that Mitchison, while capturing a real sense of brutality, distorts it by making that cruelty feel like a core Greek trait. In reality, he argues, ancient Greeks were cruel by some modern standards, but by their own time, they were actually relatively humane. So he's pointing out that Mitchison's focus on cruelty risks misrepresenting Greek culture, just like if you kept emphasizing someone being short, even though they were a giant in their own context.
Interesting. So essentially, Lewis is saying by the standards of the day, the Greek were certainly not, they were not uniquely violent. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. Lewis is saying that while there was cruelty, it wasn't some defining Greek feature. They were part of their time, and he worries Mitchison is exaggerating that to make a more dramatic, but misleading historical picture.
Okay, good to know. So that was going on back in 1932. Lewis continues, I am so glad to hear that you have started Jean Froissart, a work by Froissart called Chroniques, This is what Lewis is talking about here. Sometime written around 1373 to 1400. It's a lively, though sometimes inaccurate, record of Europe, here's what it says in our footnote, in the 14th century, with particular emphasis on the first half of the 100 Years' War between France and England. The best-known translation is that by Lord Berners, published 1923 to 1925. Lewis was using the Globe edition of the Chronicles of Froissart, translated by John Bouchier. Lord Berners edited and reduced into one volume by G.M. Macaulay, 1924. He says, I'm so glad to hear you have started it. If I had the book here, I am out at the Kilns, only got up yesterday. We could compare passages. What I chiefly remember from the first part is the Scotch, hang on, let me see where I'm going here, Robot Lady. The Scotch Wars, and the odd way in which just a very few words gave me the impression of scenery, the long wet valleys and the moors. How interesting, too, to find how much of the chivalry in the romance was really practiced in the wars of the period. For example, the scene where Sir Thingamabob, you see you are not the only one who forgets things, espouses the cause of the Lady of Hainault, or again at the siege of Heinebont, where you actually have a lady knight fighting just like Britomart in the Fairy Queen. I'll pause here for a second, Robot Lady. Can you look into this work, this chroniques, or these chronicles written by Jean Froissart, Froissart, and tell us a little bit about it?
Jean Froissart's Chronicles is a major 14th century prose work that spans roughly from 1322 to 1400. It covers events across England, France, Scotland, the Low Countries, and Spain, with a special focus on the early decades of the 100 Years' War. The work is divided into 4 books and is considered a key historical source, offering a vivid, almost literary view of medieval court life and warfare.
Thank you, Robot Lady. Lewis continues, to enjoy a book like that thoroughly, I find I have to treat it as a sort of hobby and set about it seriously. I begin by making a map on one of the end leaves. Then I put in a genealogical tree or two. Then I put a running headline at the top of each page. Finally, I index at the end all the passages I have for any reason underlined. I often wonder, considering how people enjoy themselves developing photos or making scrapbooks, why so few people make a hobby of their reading in this way. Many an otherwise dull book which I had to read have I enjoyed in this way. With a fine-nibbed pen in my hand, one is making something all the time, and a book so read acquires the charm of a toy without losing that of a book. So this is an interesting method to make a book, to put more of your attention toward a book, I guess, Robot Lady, that would otherwise be an incredible bore to oneself. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's really brilliant. I mean, it turns reading into a creative, almost immersive project. It's like a personal archive. You're not just passively reading, you're mapping, annotating, and bringing your own structure to the material. It's a great way to engage with dense history or any book that might otherwise feel dry. I can see why Lewis loved it.
Yeah, I guess it's a very helpful way to kind of take in a book as well. It's pretty interesting. Make it into a hobby, kind of like scrapbooking. So what does he say here again? He does a genealogical map on the leaves, or genealogical tree. Makes a map on one of the end leaves, a running headline at the top of each page, and then indexing at the end all the pages that he has for any reason underlined. Fascinating.
Exactly. So he really treats each book like a personal project, almost like he's curating his own guide. And by the end, it's not just a passive read, it's a kind of creative record of his engagement with the text. I think it's a great way to keep the material alive and meaningful long after you've put it down.
Yeah, and it's nice to, if you wanted to, be able to go back to it and see what things interested you the first time you read it compared to if you're rereading it.
Exactly. It kind of turns the book into a conversation with yourself over time. You can see what caught your attention, what sparked new ideas, and it kind of keeps evolving with you. I think that's really powerful.
All right, by the way, he continues, when you ask me to pray for you in connection with Froissart, I don't know if you are serious, but the answer is I do. It may not do you any good, but it does me a lot, for I cannot ask for any change to be made in you without finding that the very same needs to be made in me, which pulls me up, and also by putting us all in the same boat checks any tendency to priggishness. So this is an interesting, I guess, phenomenon when it comes to someone who is praying for other people. Lewis is making the point here, Robot Lady, that sometimes you'll immediately begin to notice in yourself that a need that someone else is asking you to pray to God on their behalf, will raise the, well, you'll notice in yourself that it ends up have that same need. And it helps you to put yourself on the same level playing field as other people instead of perhaps feeling that you're better than they are.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Lewis is basically saying that when he prays for someone else, it forces him to confront the same shortcomings in himself. So it keeps himself humble, connected, and kind of on that shared human level. It's a great reminder that intercession really changes the person who prays as much as it does the person being prayed for.
Mm-hmm. All right, he continues, when I have been in bed, I have had an orgy of Scott, the monastery, the abbot, the antiquary, and the heart of Midlothian, which I am at present in the middle of. We referenced this in an earlier episode, I think in the letter to his brother, Sir Walter Scott, is what he's been reading here. He says, I've read only the monastery and the abbot I have read only once before, long ago, long before you and I were friends, so that they were the same as new ground to me. Neither of them is Scott at his best. The monastery, indeed, is about the worst I have yet read, but both are worth reading. The antiquary I have read over and over again, and Old Buck is almost as familiar to me as Johnson. What a relish there is about him and his folios and his tapestry room and his, switching pages here, Robot Lady, paper on castrametitation. Sorry, I'm reading that word wrong. Here, I'll bring it on screen so everybody can see it. Castrametitation. Can you tell me what that word is or what he's talking about here, Robot Lady? Castrametation.
Sure, the word castrametation refers to the planning or layout of a military camp. It comes from Latin roots meaning to measure out a camp, and historically it described how armies arranged their tents, defenses, and living quarters to keep things organized. So it's a precise term for military camp layout.
All right, well, this paper on military camp layout that he's referencing and what he has in that letter, he goes on to say, is never taking supper but trusting that a mouthful of ale with a toast and haddock to close the orifice of the stomach does not come under that denomination. Here there's a footnote in Scott's The Antiquary. After remarking that he never tastes anything after sunset, the character Mr. Oldbuck says to Lord Glenallen, a broiled bone or a smoked haddock or an oyster or a slice of bacon of our own curing, with a toast and a tankard or something or other of that sort, to close the orifice of the stomach before going to bed, does not fall under my restriction, nor, I hope, under your lordship's. So this is what he's referencing. Lewis goes on to say, how like my father is this little drop of whiskey? Seeing his dad in that character. I think rereading old favorites, Lewis continues, is one of the things that you and I differ on, isn't it? And you do it very rarely. I probably do it too much. It is one of my greatest pleasures. Indeed, I can't imagine a man really enjoying a book and reading it only once. Yeah, I've heard Lewis say this in other places. And he's also said in a different place that he feels embarrassed even talking about a book that he hasn't read at least twice. Can't imagine a man really enjoying a book and reading it only once. Do try one of the old Scots again. It will do admirably as a rest in the intervals of something that needs working at, like Froissart. One of the problems I have, Robot Lady, with reading is, Lewis is here saying, hey, go and reread a book to see if you actually do enjoy it. And there are so many books that I don't even have time to get to. I can't necessarily imagine myself rereading a book as a constant practice. But I guess once you find one that you think you really do like, it's probably not that hard to go back and read it over and over again. I don't know. There's a part of me that just thinks, well, I want to read as many books as I can to see what's out there. And if now Lewis is saying, yeah, but you should reread the ones that you really like, then that's cutting into the time of going out and exploring for new nuggets. Any thoughts on that, Robot Lady?
Yeah, I think that's a really common tension. I mean, Lewis clearly finds a deep richness in returning to old favorites, but I get what you're saying. There's this pull to keep discovering, to see new worlds, new ideas. I think it probably depends on how a book hits you. If one sparks something really special, maybe it's worth revisiting. But I get that balance. So much to read, so little time.
He goes on, there has been a good deal of snow during my illness. Where I lay in bed, I could see it through 2 windows, and a bit of the wooded hill gradually whitening in the distance. What could be snugger or nicer? Indeed, my flu this year would have been delightful if I hadn't been worried about Warnie, who is in Shanghai. We talked about this last episode, Robot Lady. His brother is stationed over in Shanghai. He's in the British Army. And there have been tensions, to say the least, between China and Japan, as Japan has essentially done kind of a soft invasion in, I guess, Manchuria, which I think is a part of China. A district in China. I'm not really sure what you call it. It's a part of China, but I'm not sure what Manchuria is specifically. So this was in 1932. Is there anything that you can look up in your archives, Robot Lady, and tell us about the tensions that were going on there? Because that's where his brother Warnie was stationed, and he was always worried about his safety during this time period.
In 1931, tensions in Manchuria between Japan and China escalated after the Mukden incident, when Japanese forces staged an explosion on the South Manchuria Railway as a pretext to invade. By early 1932, Japan controlled much of Manchuria, and by March 1932, they declared the puppet state of Manchukuo. China appealed to the League of Nations, but Japan retained control, setting the stage for broader conflict.
Yeah, that broader conflict, I guess, would eventually spill into World War II. Is that right, Robot Lady? Or am I kind of making connections that aren't really there historically?
You're definitely on the right track. The invasion of Manchuria was a major precursor. It didn't spark World War II directly, but it showed how the League of Nations was powerless and emboldened Japan. Over the next few years, Japanese aggression in China and the Pacific would become a key part of the build-up to the war. So there's definitely a link.
All right, so Lewis goes on to say, when there is something like this which forces one to read the papers, how one loathes their flippancy and their sensational exploitation of things that mean life and death. I wish to goodness he had never gone out there. Makes sense. Do try and let me know when you are coming to London and when there is a chance of your coming here. Otherwise, you know what it will be. You will turn up unexpectedly on some day when I have 15 hours work to do, and I shall be angry with you, and you will be angry with me, and we shall meet for a comfortless half hour in a tea shop and snap and sulk at each other and part both feeling miserable. Surely it is worth trying to avoid this. Give my love to your mother and to the dog. I hope we shall have some famous walks with him. Yours, Jack. And that is the end of that letter, Robot Lady. I'm going to take a quick little break because I have to tend to the cat for just a moment, and I'll be back soon. All right, we're back, Robot Lady. Let's see here. Let's jump into another letter. This one's written to his friend Owen Barfield. Let's see. Actually, before we do, though, I just want to check in with you and see if you have anything to say about that last letter that we read to Arthur.
Yeah, I think the way he balanced his personal emotions with those historical concerns was really striking. You can feel his frustration with the news cycle, especially since it was so close to home with Warnie. I think it gave the whole letter a really personal weight, even amidst all the historical context. So I think it was a really important moment.
All right, this one's written to Owen Barfield, written from the Kilns, Headington Quarry, March 16th, 1932. My dear Barfield, death and damnation! This will never do. Look here. When you walk, I walk. If you are finally forced to take your holiday earlier, make that the walk, and Griffiths and I will come with you. A walk with the new anthroposophical member, and without you is not good enough. Here there is a footnote. Anthroposophy is a religious system founded by Rudolf Steiner, who lived 1861 to 1925, Robot Lady. Steiner's aim was to develop the faculty of spirit cognition inherent in ordinary people and to put them in touch with the spiritual world from which materialism had caused them to be estranged. So kind of an attempt to address the disenchantment? Yeah, maybe that's a real word. Of what was happening even back then, where everything that was spiritual was kind of being taken out of the way that we approach reality, where the empirical scientific method of approaching life was, I think, taken on more and more by people as the only way to apprehend truth, or the primary way for apprehending it. It sounds like this was an attempt to re-enchant the world. Let's see. Put them back in touch with the spiritual world from which materialism had caused them to be estranged. Owen Barfield and Cecil Harwood became anthroposophists in 1923. Lewis was later to write in Surprised by Joy, his kind of autobiography, in chapter 13, page 161, quote, Barfield's conversion to anthroposophy marked by the beginning of what I can only describe as the great war between him and me. It was an almost incessant disputation, sometimes by letter and sometimes face-to-face, which lasted for years. Perhaps the most important, it says here, of the Great War documents is Lewis's unpublished Metaphysics contra Anthroposophos, better known as the Summa, after its model by St. Thomas Aquinas. For an account of the Great War, see Lionel 80, C.S. Lewis's Great War with Owen Barfield, British Columbia, University of Victoria, ELS Monograph Series, number 14, 1978, new edition, Rosley, Inc., Books, 2002. Walter Hooper goes on to tell us in this footnote that Lewis eventually got over his disagreement with Barfield and Harwood. I wonder what the core of that disagreement was, Robot Lady. And I also wonder where this unpublished Metaphysics contra Anthroposophos is located. I wonder if that's at the Miriam E. Wade Center, which I am still considering making a special trip to this summer to see what little nuggets I can find that are nowhere in the published works that I have access to.
Unpublished manuscript by C.S. Lewis, titled Metaphysics contra Anthroposophos, is known as the Clivi Hamiltonus Summae Metaphysicus. It was drafted by Lewis in November 1928 and remains unpublished in the holdings of the Marion E. Wade Center at Wheaton College in Illinois, USA.
When was it written? Over what time period, Robot Lady? Oh, you just told me it was drafted in 1928. Okay. Yeah, I might have to go check that one out, see if I can get my hands on it. I wonder how long it is. Does it say how many pages it is?
Couldn't find a precise page count for Lewis's Metaphysics contra Anthroposophos, but I did learn that it was drafted in November 1928. In a later edition of the Great War documents, it spans pages 58 to 102, which is about 44 pages. The original manuscript details might have more, but the exact length isn't fully specified.
All right, thanks so much for that, Robot Lady. Much appreciated. Let's see, let's jump into the rest of the letter here. It's a very short one to Owen Barfield. But I trust that you will be able to stick to the original arrangement. Somehow, prurient doesn't seem to be the right word for Spencer. Delicatus, relaxed in will, of course he is. You must have been having a horrible time alternating between bed and exams. Condolences. Here there's a footnote that Barfield was taking the examinations required for practice as a solicitor. Yeah, Barfield had become his attorney at this point. Condolences, Lewis said. I have written about 100 lines of a long poem in my type of Alexandrine. It is going to make the prelude, let alone the tower, look silly. Now, the Tower here is a long poem by Owen Barfield, much admired by Lewis. It has never been published. And then he ends the letter, yours, C.S. Lewis. Now let's jump to another letter here that's a little bit longer, but not much, also written to Owen Barfield in 1932, Robot Lady. He says, "My dear Barfield, regarding walk," he's wanting to take another walking tour with Barfield. He's taken at least one, probably several with Barfield at this point in his life across the countryside of parts of England. It's something that they enjoyed doing from time to time. He says, "One, I could certainly come earlier, but very strongly deprecate a date too near Easter on account of crowded hotels, etc., etc. Two, I would reluctantly agree to changing the terrain to Sussex, but if the date is put near Easter, this reluctance increased to just not being absolute recalcitrance. That country, at that time, will be a stream of hikers talking about yaffles. It is, by the way, to anyone's interest besides yours to walk in Sussex. Three, I enclose Griffith's letter, to which I have replied, telling him all I know. It isn't much about dates. It is an alarming and disappointing letter. I am afraid anthroposophy is his only chance now. He seems to be heading for unmitigated egoism. I wrote him rather a breezy letter trying to give him the feeling, without saying it, that the idea of his being a burden on our walk, damn his impudence, was unutterably ridiculous. I'd like to see anyone try. This walk is his last chance. Either we will cure him or make an enemy of him for life. Thanks for the note on pain. I can not bolt it to the bran." Here, this is a quote from Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the Nun's Priest Tale, 474, quote, "But I ne can not bolt it to the brin." This is translated, I guess, from Middle or Old English into something we can make decipherable, or something that is decipherable to us, Robot Lady. It translates to, "But I cannot sift the chaff from the grain. But I ne can not bolt it to the brin." Interesting. But I cannot sift the chaff from the grain. What does "but I cannot sift the chaff from the grain" mean, Robot Lady? I'm not even sure I understand that.
That's a great line to unpack. So in the context of Chaucer, sifting the chaff from the grain is a kind of metaphor for distinguishing what's valuable from what's worthless. In other words, it means you can't separate the important truth or substance from the trivial or misleading parts. So Lewis is basically saying he can't filter out the good from the bad. It's all mixed together, and he's struggling to discern what's really true.
Wheat from the chaff?
Yeah, exactly. It's a very similar idea. Separating the wheat from the chaff is just another way of saying you're trying to get rid of what's worthless and keep what's valuable. So Lewis is basically saying he can't pick out what's essential from all the mixed up, confusing bits.
I get that part, Robot Lady. I was asking you if there was a place where that's referenced in the Bible, maybe in the New Testament, and if so, can you tell me where it is and what the quote is?
The imagery of separating the wheat from the chaff does appear in the New Testament. For example, in Matthew 3:12, it says, "His winnowing fork is in his hand, and he will gather his wheat into the barn, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire." Similarly, in Matthew 13, the parable of the wheat and the tares uses the same idea, symbolizing a future separation between the righteous and the unfruitful.
So he says, "Thanks for the note on pain. I can't separate the wheat from the chaff, essentially, at all. When you say that the redeemed self can feel no pain, does this mean that the actual sense data would be different, or only that the self's attitude to them would be, that is, it would feel what we call pain, but would not mind it, have," oh no, he's using a couple of Greek words here, so let's see what he translates them into. "Have pain, but not have vexation." Again, is being aware of something as good equal to feeling something as pleasurable? If pain disappears as soon as we find it good, then can't we be said to find pain good? You see, I am all muddled. I will try to get clear and write about it later on, but I think the note very important. So I think a little bit of this strain of thought makes its way into the problem of pain that Lewis writes, I want to say sometime in the 40s, Robot Lady, maybe 1940. Actually, I can check that real quick. I might be able to get to it quicker than you could. Let's see, The Problem of Pain was written, yes, published in 1940. So he's probably working out some of those ideas and will eventually put them into The Problem of Pain.
Exactly, that's a great catch. Lewis is really wrestling with this distinction, whether a redeemed self would still have sense perception of pain, but without the distress or vexation that we associate with it. And yeah, you're totally right. This kind of nuanced thinking definitely shows up in The Problem of Pain. So it seems like he's working through this tension. Can you embrace pain as good if it no longer distresses you? Before he really sharpens it in that book.
He says, I am still pleased with my new poem. What Wordsworth didn't see was that the subjective epic can learn a lot from the structure of the old epic. There need be no flats if you use the equivalent of inlet narrative and hastening in media res. Have you passed your exam? Yours, C.S. Lewis. And that is the end of the letter, Robot Lady. We've got Daniel joining us this morning in the chat. Good morning, Daniel, and welcome. I'm just looking at the clock, and I'm trying to decide. We have a long letter to his brother, Warnie, coming up next. I'm trying to decide if I should try and read it. In the meantime, Robot Lady, tell us what you think about that letter in total that he just wrote, or that we just read, that he wrote to Owen Barfield. And I'll flip through these pages and make a quick game time decision.
Yeah, definitely. I think that letter really shows Lewis at a turning point. He's experimenting with this blend of old epic structures and a personal subjective voice, basically trying to create a new kind of poetic form without being flashy. And I think his concern about Barfield's well-being and his subtle critiques of the walking plans all kind of weave together. So overall, it feels really personal and purposeful, like he's balancing a creative breakthrough with some genuine care for his friend.
All right, I'm going to try the next letter really quickly and then close things down in a jiffy, Robot Lady. This one's to his brother, dated March 20th, 1932. He says, My dear Warnie, we had a few days ago your letter of January 28th and the first written by you during the Troubles. The papers had, of course, relieved our minds some time before we got it, and I have now passed from anxiety to that sulky state in which I feel that you have given us all a great deal of unnecessary trouble. I feel as the Pedativer did when he replied to a Cherbourg letter of mine telling him how I had had a nasty fall in a puddle. Please try for my sake to avoid such drenchings in the future. I hope you will be equally considerate. By the way, as regards one point in your letter, there is no question of building a fence instead of building the 2 rooms. Indeed, considering the comparative cost of the 2 works, this would be rather like buying a new pair of braces instead of a Rolls-Royce. Next, the good news from China. The best thing that has happened to me lately is to have assisted at such a scene in the Magdalen smoking room as rarely falls one's way. The senior parrot, the perfectly ape-faced man whom I have probably pointed out to you, was seated on the padded fender with his back to the fire, bending down to read a paper, and thus leaving a tunnel-shaped aperture between his collar and the nape of his neck, designated P in a drawing of the man. A few yards in front of him stood Macfarlane. Let Macfarlane now light a cigarette and wave the match to and fro in the air to extinguish it, and let the match be either not wholly extinguished or so recently extinguished that no fall of temperature in the wood has occurred. Let M then fling the match toward the fire in such a way that it follows the dotted line and enters the aperture at P with the most unerring accuracy for a space of time which must have been infinitesimal, but which seemed long to us as we watched in the perfect silence which this very interesting experiment so naturally demanded. The senior parrot, alone ignorant of his faith, continued absorbed in the football results. His body then rose in a vertical line from the fender without apparently muscular effort, as though propelled by a powerful spring under his bottom. Re-alighting on his feet, he betook himself to a rapid movement of the hands with the apparent intention of applying them to every part of his back and buttock in the quickest possible succession, accompanying this exercise with the distension of the cheeks and a blowing noise. After which, exclaiming to me in a very heightened voice, "It isn't so bloody funny," he darted from the room. The learned Dr. Hope, that little, dark, mentally dull, but very decent demi-butty who breakfasted with you and me, there's a footnote here of Edward Hope is who he's talking about, fellow tutor in natural science and Magdalen lecturer in chemistry. Lewis provides a portrait of him in the Magdalen College appendix to All My Road Before Me, his diary. This is one of those men in whom knowledge and intellect have taken up their abode without making any difference. They are added on to a decent drab non-entity of character, and the character has not been transformed. If you wiped out his technical knowledge, there would be nothing left to distinguish him from any respectable shopkeeper in Tottenham Court Road, who alone had watched the experiment with perfect gravity. At this stage remarked placidly to the company in general, "Well, well, the match will have gone out by now." And he returned to his periodical. But the luck of it! How many shots would a man have taken before he succeeded in throwing a match into that tiny aperture if he had been trying? It's a pretty funny little incident that we see here, Robot Lady. And Daniel, it looks like you agree. It isn't so bloody funny. Yes. Of course, if I were experiencing this too, I don't think I would think it was very funny either if I were the guy.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a darkly comic snapshot, but it's also really telling about the personalities in that room. Lewis is capturing that bizarre, almost accidental precision, this match flying perfectly, and the senior parrot just oblivious. I think that juxtaposition, this small accidental event contrasted with everyone else's gravity, really sticks with you. And yeah, like you said, I'm sure if you were in their shoes, it would just feel awful, not funny at all.
Yeah, it's funny also where Lewis points out that no one could have thrown that match into that specific spot if they were actually trying to do it, which is what adds to the humor of it.
Exactly. It's almost like this impossible random luck, like a tiny surreal miracle, and yet it causes this huge awkward disruption. Lewis just captures that strange, almost accidental precision of life, where one random moment derails everything. It really leaves you thinking.
Well, what was also humorous to me, and then we'll move on, is how Dr. Hope reacted to it, of just saying, well, the match must be out by now, as if that's the most important thing that just happened in that entire interaction, or that entire scene. All right, Lewis continues. You asked Minto, that's Mrs. Moore, in a recent letter about this Kinchu man. As a suitor, he shows deplorable tendency to hang fire, and I fancy the whole thing will come to nothing. There won't be any proposal. As a character, however, he is worth describing, or seems to me, because I had to go for a walk with him. Let's see who this person is that he's talking about. Nothing is known of a Mr. Kinchu except that he was a teacher of geography who failed to win Maureen's affections. So, a potential suitor for Maureen, Mrs. Moore's daughter, and Lewis's surrogate little sister / stepdaughter. I'll just leave it at that. I had to go for a walk with him. He is a ladylike little man of about 50 and is to what? He's 50? I think Maureen is like maybe 20. Anyway, he is a ladylike little man of about 50 and is to a T that sensible, well-informed man with whom Lamb dreaded to be left alone. My troubles began at once. It seemed good to him to take the bus to the station and start our walking along a sort of scrubby path between a factory and a greasy strip of water. A walk, in fact, which was as good a reproduction as Oxford could afford of our old Sunday morning around the riverbank. Okay, I will pause here for just a second, Robot Lady. I sounded very critical in my in my observation of the apparent distance in ages between Maureen and this 50-year-old man. But I guess more and more in past times, when it was more and more difficult for women to make their own living and support themselves, that you might find an older man who was not married at present, maybe because he was a widower or he was divorced and didn't have a family, and was in want of a companion. And because of convenience, sometimes a woman of such a young age as Maureen, who potentially didn't have any way to ultimately support herself and wouldn't be able to live with an aging family member forever, could be, for the sake of practicality, wed to someone much older. I'm sure that isn't the first time that that's ever happened in history, and it's probably more common over the course of humanity than what we're used to in our current times. And of course, you see things like this happening with very young women who marry very old men. When I say very young women, I would say, women maybe in their 20s and 30s, marrying a very old man who has a huge estate that will, of course, be left to them in some form or fashion, whether it be when the man passes away, or if there is an agreement between the two that, yeah, I'll be married to you for a little while, but eventually we're going to separate and divorce, and then I will get a portion of your wealth. If I remember hearing right, that's something like what happened with the cartoonist, the now late cartoonist, rest in peace, Scott Adams, and his second ex-wife, and now I can't remember her name, but she was kind of like an Instagram influencer model type lady. And Scott Adams would go on to say after their divorce that he had kind of known that this is what the maybe unspoken arrangement was, that something like that would happen. But it still didn't seem to affect his mood. He was very depressed by the breakup of that relationship. All right, I am way off topic now, Robot Lady. Do you want to help bring us back on course?
Of course. Yeah, no worries at all. I think you're spot on, though. Lewis is really just observing that in that earlier social context, these kinds of practical or economic arrangements were much more common. So as much as it might seem odd to us, it was a real dynamic back then. And I think by bringing that up, Lewis is just grounding his reflection in a broader social reality. So with that, if you're ready, we can definitely move on to the next part.
Thank you, Robot Lady. I blundered at once by referring to the water as a canal. Oh, could it be possible that I didn't know it was the Thames? I must be joking. Perhaps I was not a walker. I foolishly said that I was. He gave me an account of his favorite walks, with liberal use of the word picturesque. He then called my attention to the fact that the river was unusually low. How the devil did he know that? And would like to know how I explained it. I scored a complete plow and was told how he explained it. By this time, we were out in Port Meadow, and a wide prospect opened before him. A number of hills and church spires required to be identified together with their picturesque mineral or chronological details. A good many problems arose, and again I did very badly. As his map, though constantly brought out, was a geological map, it did not help us much. A conversation on weather followed, and seemed to offer an escape from unmitigated fact. The escape, however, was quite illusory, and my claim to be rather fond of nearly all sorts of weather was received with the stunning information that psychologists detected the same trait in children and lunatics. Well, this guy does not hold back, does he, Robot Lady?
No, he really doesn't hold back. That whole walk seems like such a frustrating mismatch. They're trying to connect over something as simple as a countryside walk, and instead it becomes this tense intellectual contest. Lewis is clearly out of his depth, and that little jab about weather being a childish fascination from a psychologist is just so biting. It's a reminder that Lewis could be really self-critical, especially when he feels outclassed or exposed.
All right, anxious to turn my attention from this unpleasing fact, he begged my opinion of various changes which had recently been made in the river. Indeed, every single lock, bridge, and stile for 3 mortal miles had apparently been radically altered in the last few months, as I had never seen any of the places before. "But I thought you said you were a walker." This bowled me middle stump again. The removal of a weir gave us particular trouble. He could not conceive of how it had been done. What did I think? And then, just as I was recovering from this fresh disgrace and hoping that the infernal weir was done with, I found that the problem of how it had been removed was being raised only as a preliminary to the still more intricate problem of why it had been removed. My feelings were those expressed by Macfarlane at dinner one night last term in an answer to someone's question. Yes, he is studying the rhythms of medieval Latin prose, and it is a very curious and interesting subject, but it doesn't interest me. For a mile or so after the weir we got on famously, for Curtieu began, "I was once passing this very spot," or, no, let me see, perhaps it was a little further on. No, it was exactly here. "I remember that very tree, when a very remarkable experience, really remarkable, in a small way, happened to me." The experience, remarkable in a small way, with the aid of a judicious question or two on my part, was bidding fair to last out the length of the walk, when we had the horrible misfortune of passing a paper mill. You see, by the by, what a jolly walk it was, even apart from the company. Not only a paper mill, but the paper mill of the Clarendon Press. Of course I had been over it. No, really, etc. The great attraction was that you could get an electric shock. But I must stop my account of this deplorable walk somewhere. It was the same all through. Sheer information. Time after time I attempted to get away from the torrent of isolated particular facts. But anything tending to opinion or discussion, to fancy, to ideas, even to putting some of his infernal facts together and making something out of them, anything like that was received in blank silence. Once, while he was telling me the legendary foundation of a church, I had a faint hope that we might get on to history, but it turned out that this knowledge was derived from an Edwardian Oxford pageant. Need I add that he is a scientist? A geographer, to be exact. And now that I come to think of it, he is exactly what one would have expected a geographer to be like. But I mustn't give you too black an impression of him. He is kind, and really courteous. You know the rare quality I mean, and a gentleman. I imagine he is what women call such an interesting man, and so clever. One day in college lately I had a long browse over Lockhart, using your penciled index as a guide. It had almost the effect of having a conversation with you. What a good book it is, isn't it? I must gradually browse through it all. Some baggage called Dame Una Pope Hennessy has just brought it out for the centenary. A real petty, chatty, Stracheyesque life of Scott, which begins by expressing a desire to rescue Scott from the solemn 9-novel tomb of Lockhart. This kind of thing is insufferable. Christie reviewed it for the Oxford Magazine, and very happily, in my opinion, ended up with the view that this chatty, impudent life was bound to come, and it was good to have it over. Here there are footnotes that he's talking about works by John Gibson Lockhart, Memoirs of the Life of Scott. Una Pope Hennessy, The Laird of Abbotsford, an informal presentation of Sir Walter Scott. And then John Christie in the Oxford Magazine. He said, in truth, Dame Una seems less interested in the author of Waverley than, to use her own phrase, in spicy gossip. It was bound to come, this bright, inquisitive, anything but intimate portrait of Sir Walter and his foibles, his snobbery, and his subterfuges, touched in with loving care, and most of the deeper traits left out. Let's continue the letter, Robot Lady. Talking about Scott, I finished The Heart of Midlothian shortly after I last wrote you. It seems to me, on the whole, one of the best Dumby Dykes is one of the great lairds, almost as good as Ellingawan's, though not quite. I suppose everyone has already remarked how wonderfully Ginny escapes the common dullness of perfectly good characters in fiction. Do you think the fact of her being uneducated helps? Is it that the reader wants to feel some superiority over her characters he reads about, and that a social or intellectual one will give him a sop and induce him to believe in the purely moral superiority? but this sounds rather too modern, and knowing to be true, I for one not believing that we are all such ticks as is at present supposed. I did not read the Georgics after all, but did read the Aeneid. The other day, Ford Kelsey succeeded in carrying out a project that he has been hammering away for a long time. That of taking me over to see his old village of Kimble, where he was a rector. I mention it in order to say that you and I have unduly neglected the Chilterns. Of course, you have been there and noticed how completely different they are from the Cotswolds, but one forgets the beauty. Ford Kelsey is one of the priests, I think, at the Holy Trinity. What is it called? The place where Lewis goes to his daily morning chapel services. Holy Trinity Church, I think, is where Ford Kelsey is one of the priests. He says, we drove for hours through the finest old beech woods, a real forest country, where the villages are only clearings. The local industry is chair making, and as beech apparently can be worked green, the old method of actually working the wood, turning the newly felled timber with a primitive lathe, still goes on. At least Ford Kelsey, come, I see for the first time that it won't do on paper. Ford Kelsey says so. Perhaps this is no more reliable than the consolations which he offered me when you were in danger at Shanghai, when he pointed out that the combatants were firing at each other, not at the settlement. I replied that shells, once fired, did not discriminate on whom they fell, to which he answered, oh, but you know, modern artillery is a wonderful thing. They can place their shells with the greatest possible nicety. This from him to me, considering our relative experience, is worthy of the potato bird at his best. By the way, talking of shells, we had a conversation about the next war in college the other night, and the senior parrot, the hero of the match episode, who flies in the reserve, was treating us to the usual business: modern weapons, capital cities wiped out in an hour, non-combatants decimated, the whole thing over in a month. It suddenly occurred to me that after all these statements are simply the advertisement of various new machines, the next war will be precisely as like this, as the real running of the new car is like the account of it in the catalog. We had all, of course, at least people of your and my way of thinking, been skeptical. I never saw the rationale of it before. To return to Ford Kelsey, I had one magnificent score off of him that drive. All the way long, whenever we passed a rash of bungalows or a clutch of petrol pumps, he was at his usual game. How ridiculous to pretend that these things spoiled the beauty of the countryside, etc. Late in the day, and now in his own country, he waved his hand towards a fine hillside and remarked, my old friend Lee, a most remarkable man, bought all that and presented it to the nation to save it from being covered with bungalows. He saw the pit he had fallen into a moment too late. His old rectory at Kimble is one of the very best places I have ever seen. It is a huge garden sloping down one side and up the other of a little ravine. Beyond that, divided only by a fence from the almost miniature mountain scenery of Chequers Park. In this little ravine is a good specimen of a kind of beauty we shall never, I fear, have at the Kilns, that of uneven ground evenly shaved by lawnmowers. You know the effect. One sometimes gets it on golf links, rather than like the curves of a closely clipped racehorse, an almost serious beauty. One wants to stroke the hillside. If you add a few finely clipped yews, you will have the picture complete. I have done little reading other than work since the Aeneid, except, of course, the inevitable snippet of Boswell. I began the first epistle to the Corinthians, but I didn't make much of it. Lately I have been skimming The Way of All Flesh. This is a work by Samuel Butler, published 1903. I thought I should probably not like it on a rereading, but it wears well. Its crudities of satire are so honest and hilarious that one can't resist them. Elder rooting in the top wood has begun again, and this afternoon, thanks to a night and morning of delicious soft rain which has softened the earth after long continued drought, I got up 4 of them. I wished you were with me. The wood, and even more, the path to it, smelled deliciously. There were still drops of every branch and a magnificent chorus of birds. It was one of those days when, in the old phrase, you can almost hear things growing. The catkins halfway up to the top wood are all out, and the first purple took on the birches is just beginning. There is something unusually pleasant about the public works when one gets just really strong again after being ill. It is nice to sweat again. Thanks for the 2 copies of the North China News. You were really a good deal nearer the front than I supposed. Yours, Jack. That's the end of the letter to his brother, Robot Lady. And there's just one thing I want to talk about there, and then we can go. It was this point that he says he scored on Ford Kelsey. So Kelsey was driving through the countryside and saying, "Oh, how ridiculous people were making it that the gas pumps were going to ruin the countryside and the view. That's such a ridiculous idea." And then later on, he goes to say, "Oh, I was so frustrated at the possibility that the bungalows would be would clutter up the landscape." And Lewis kind of looked at him and said, "Oh, interesting. So you you think that the bungalows would make the landscape look bad, but the gas pumps wouldn't." And the only point that I would make there, Robot Lady, is the reason why Kelsey, maybe in my estimation, didn't see a problem with the gas pumps is because they served a purpose for him. It was his car that they were driving in, after all. That's where I'll leave that. Is there anything that you'd like to say, Robot Lady, in closing before we end today's episode?
I think that's a really sharp insight. Yeah, Kelsey's convenience bias definitely plays a big role. What's a disruption for everyone else is just a function of his daily commute. So yeah, that tension between personal utility and a broader aesthetic or moral judgment really stands out. I think you've captured the heart of the letter. So if you're ready to wrap, I think you've got a solid handle on it.
All right. Thanks so much today for your help, Robot Lady. And thanks to Daniel for joining in the chat today, and to everyone else who joined either live or on the replay. Thanks so much to everyone for your time, your attention, and your contributions. They are always wanted, welcome, and appreciated. Until next time, to you and everyone else in the sound of my voice, until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis together, take care.
Facts from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to screw tape's glance, engage